Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to be covering some tips for once you go under contract, what's next. Don't just sit around. You're going to find out 8 tips that we use to drastically reduce our timelines on our projects. And it's a mistake we made on our first project. I don't want you to make the same mistake, so I'm here tonight to tell you 8 tips on how you can speed up your overall timeline by some simple actionable steps you can take once you're under contract. So let's give everyone a second to join. I saw we had a few early people join from Arkansas and Baltimore, which is fantastic. Then I saw some conversation getting started while we were waiting, which is great. It's always a good resource to be able to talk to different real estate investors while you're waiting. So always use BiggerPockets to the max. We have some, I don't know if Canada, if that's a question mark or not, Houston, Pittsburgh, and Charlotte. That's fantastic. I'm really happy to see Indianapolis, another person from Indiana, and California. So it seems like we're covering a lot of the states here. So promise not to cough into the microphone. Jordan, I promise I will not cough into the microphone. I'm really sorry. I had a little tickle in my throat last time, and it is 9 o'clock here on the East Coast, and I have been going nonstop all day, as I'm sure you all are. So I apologize for that last time. All right, so let's get started. The first thing, the first tip of the 8 tips I'm going to give you is is a tip that we use when writing an offer. So when we write an offer, we actually do no conditions on our offers, except that we get 3 additional walkthroughs on the property prior to closing, and we write in there that it is not an inspection. Any findings we find during that walkthrough do not change our offer at all. They are just a matter of being able to bring our contractors, architects, anyone else we want into the house while we have it under contract. This is really important because this is what is going to save you the most amount of time if you can write this in on your contract. So make sure that you write in at least, I would say 2, but preferably 3 different walkthroughs that you can use. And I'm gonna go through why those 3, what you should be doing during those 3 walkthroughs. So tip number 2 is during that walkthrough, you should be getting all of your subs to come through and start writing up the estimates. This means that you will have all of your estimates prior to closing on the property. On our first property, we did not have any of our subs come through the property until we took over the property. Well, I'm sure you all know that it takes subcontractors a lot of time to draft an estimate. They're busy doing jobs, on their daily work. They're doing the actual physical work, and the last thing on their mind is to write up estimates. So estimates typically take a little while. There's a lot of lag time to estimates, and you don't want to be on the brunt end of the estimate. So the delay. Sorry, I'm a little flustered tonight because I'm actually a little exhausted. We've had a very busy day today, as I mentioned, but make sure that you get these estimates up very early on in the process. So as soon as you get it under contract, you should be scheduling your subs to come through and make sure that they get those estimates drafted right away. And you can start deciding whether or not you want to go with one contractor versus another. It gives you that time to review estimates against each other and compare. Tip number 3, when you're walking through the property, you should be taking measurements. This is a great opportunity to figure out how many windows you need and what sizes you need, the doors you need. You can do takeoff of material for lumber. You can have your takeoff for the flooring, the carpet, tile. I mean, you can get your materials list, which is another tip too, is draft your material list. but you can really start to zone in on all of the materials that you need and all of the measurements you need as well. You can also start to configure how the property is going to lay out by having all of these measurements. Another thing that we have noticed is with older properties, a lot of time when there are additions, the records aren't changed. So when you're taking the measurements, you can identify if this property has an accurate square footage, which a lot of older homes do not have accurate square footage recorded in the county records. So that's something that will obviously help on the sale to have a larger footprint. Another tip is identifying your schedule. So if you're able to get your estimates, you should also be able to not only draft a rough schedule, but also communicate that schedule to your subs so you can be penciled in when you actually need them in advance. You should be able to have a schedule finalized prior to closing on the property, and all of your subs should be on, alert that I will probably need you a month out, a month and a half out, whenever. But the point is that you should give a rough estimate as to when you think that you'll be ready for that particular trade to come in and do their job. This is really a good tip to make sure that you pay attention to, because we all know that when you're rehabbing, things can quickly go off schedule. But if you are communicating to your subs very frequently the timeline and give them enough advance notice, they know that you respect them. You respect their schedule. You respect the fact that they have other work, especially when you first get started. You are not going to have people solely dedicated to your project alone. So if you show that respect from the beginning, then when you have a hang up, let's say the inspector causes a delay, so that delays the next trade. If you give them advance notice, as soon as you find out that that's going to cause a delay, and you give them advance notice because of the rapport that you've established along the way, that trade will then respect the fact that it was out of your control. They'll bump someone else on their schedule and then slot you in where it is optimal for you and your project. So you really want to make sure that you respect your subs' schedules and you create a schedule from the beginning and share that with your subs prior to even taking ownership of the property. I mentioned this earlier about material list, but also inclusive of that material list are your plumbing finishes. There's a lot of lead time needed for vanities if you're not buying them right off the shelf from Home Depot, Lowe's, any big box store. So if you're doing a renovation that requires either a unique plumbing fixture and or a higher end plumbing finish, a vanity, then you definitely need to order that in advance. Now, I know that people are going to probably comment or say that that is risky. It definitely is risky. If you don't think that you're going to close on the property, or there is any chance that the property may not close, I wouldn't advise doing this. However, I would definitely make sure that you order that vanity right after close. But you also have the spec sheet of the vanity so you can give it to your plumbers so they can rough in appropriately. If people don't understand right now why this is important, it's important because where the plumbing comes out of the wall, the vanity is like a piece of furniture. So if you think of it as a piece of furniture and the plumbing can only come out of the wall in certain areas, you don't want to have to pay a plumber to move the plumbing to the center of where the vanity is, because let's say you have drawers on either side of the vanity and originally you thought that the plumbing should come out on the left or the right, let's say if it's a single vanity. So it's really important that you make sure that you know the finished materials you're going to be using, because in the end, it'll save you the cost and the time of having the plumber have to rework it because you chose a vanity that they didn't have the specs to when they were doing rough-in plumbing. All right, next tip. While you're doing your walkthroughs, another person that should definitely be included on this little tour that you're giving of the property is your architect. Your architect will be able to then establish drawings for the entire project. Most of the townships we work in require drawings by an architect to outline the rough-in plumbing, HVAC, electric, if we're moving any load-bearing walls, if we're doing additions. There are a lot of different reasons that we need drawings. Architects, if anyone's worked with an architect before, they take sometimes weeks to draft the plans. I highly advise that as soon as you get under contract, if you know that you are doing any significant renovation, not a cosmetic renovation, but something that requires permits, your architect should be the very first person in that house. You should prioritize getting the architect in the house so they can start working on the drawings. In some townships, you can actually submit a permit request prior to closing on a property. A lot of townships don't allow you to do that. However, the townships that do allow you to, at least the ones we've come across, as long as you have a copy of the agreed contract with the settlement date, they will start reviewing your permit, and if you can almost have it coincide with the closing, so there's no lag time waiting for your permit application to be approved. This is definitely a way that you can save weeks instead of waiting for your permit to be approved when you acquire the property, and that's when the architect comes in the house. This has saved us months because we've been able to get the architect in advance and then also do a permit submission. Please speak to your permit office, your township office or city office, to know the permit regulations and whether or not this is applicable. If you are not allowed to do it, which I know some townships do not allow you to submit in advance, at least you'll have the drawings drafted, so you'll save some time there. Next is, when you're under contract, you should make sure that you establish the start date with all of the utility companies, as well as you need to make sure that the property is insured. So you want to make sure that you are calling all of these utility companies and your insurance company in advance, letting them know the date of closing. You do not want any lapse of coverage of utilities or insurance when you acquire the property. So you can always, if for some reason the property doesn't close, you can always call those people back and cancel the policies. But I know specifically in our area, if you do not call prior to the property closing and the previous owner turns off the service, there's actually an additional surcharge to turn the service back on and then change it in the name. So it's really important that you make sure you cover this in advance. And last but not least, and I think this is often forgotten because this is a business where we often get tied up in working in the business instead of on the business, is making sure that you have all of your administrative documents lined up. So this includes contracts with your subs, making sure that you have W-9s, copies of insurance, copies of license. You're going to need all of these documents anyway when you do your permit submission and also when you do your taxes. So you really need to make sure that you have all of these documents lined up. With the contract to the subcontractors, you need to make sure too that it outlines all of the expectations you have. You have an agreed upon price, a timeline, and agreed payment milestones as well, so everyone is on the same page. These are all things that you can do in advance of actually even owning a property or submitting an offer on a property, but 100% you should have these things all secure and finalized once you are under contract with a property. So I hope that you've enjoyed these 8 tips that I've provided on ways that we've been able to speed up the process. And this is all before we actually even have keys in hand. This is something that everyone can do. It is very easy. We have never had an offer accepted where the seller would not agree to us walking through the property a few more times prior to closing. In fact, most of the time, they don't even care how many times we walk through the property prior to closing. If it's an occupied property, they just ask for 24-hour notice or something to that effect. But most of the time, the properties are unoccupied, which means that they really don't care how many times we go through the property. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over and see what questions you all have, but I hope you've enjoyed these 8 tips, and I hope it speeds up your process and your overall timeline of getting your project wherever you need it to be, whether you're turning it into a rental or you are flipping a project, but hopefully all of these tips do apply to you as well. So with that, let's see what questions we have. Okay, so all right, let me go back up here and see if we have some questions. All right. Congratulations, Rusty, for your property. Good luck with the closing at the end of the month. Hopefully you've already started some of these actions. All right. Thank you, Jordan, for typing up the tips. All right, let's see. If you have any questions here, please make sure to type the questions in the comment section, whether you're watching on YouTube or BiggerPockets or Facebook. One of the questions received, am I a licensed real estate agent? No, I am not a licensed real estate agent, but my husband is a licensed real estate agent, and he is the real estate agent for our house flipping business. Okay. I don't see, for as many questions as we had last week, we seem to have the complete opposite this week. So I'm going to give it a couple more minutes in case anyone has been trying to get a question in. But if not, I hope everyone has a happy Thanksgiving. And I hope everyone's able to spend it with their family. So I'm just reading some of the comments, and I see that there is a little bit of technical difficulties. Unfortunately, I apologize for that. It looks like it may be something with YouTube, so I'm sorry about that. Austin, if you could possibly rephrase your question, I don't understand what you mean by go 50-50 on closing. All right, for Trace, would you recommend becoming a real estate agent? I think that is a question that is definitely a case-by-case basis. There are definitely pros and cons to being an agent, and it depends on whether you are purchasing the properties for yourself or if you're selling the properties. If you're looking to also be an agent for other properties than just your own investment properties, there are a lot of factors that are worth considering. And there are definitely a lot of articles on BiggerPockets that speak to this that you can search. I think they are probably better suited to answer that question. But there are definitely some legal issues that you need to consider as well when you're selling your own property. And that's why we keep it separate. My father and I are business partners on our house flipping business. And my husband, he is actually not involved in the business at all. He's just serving as our realtor. So it's definitely something that I think you have to consider on a case-by-case basis, and then make sure that you make the decision what works best for you. But if you're speaking to the accessibility of being able to go see properties right away, As a realtor, obviously you have that access where, I'm going with my husband because he's our realtor and I can't just pop in a house. I'm waiting for him always to show us the properties. Where do you get your contracts for subs? I actually created our contract for our subs. I looked at other templates and created the contract. I think that people should have a lawyer review their contracts or have a lawyer draft a contract, but there are contracts, there are templates for contractors on if you just do a Google search, which is what I did several years ago, and that's how I started. I just pieced together different components of contracts that I liked. I tried to keep it simplistic, but also to cover our liability as well, because obviously we're running a business and we're very dependent on the contractor showing up and doing high quality work. Okay. We are out of Pennsylvania. Rick. So Rick has some money to invest, but he's fearful of jumping in and buying his first property. I've looked at many properties, but I'm fearful of making a mistake. How do I make the right choice? There are a lot of factors at play, once again, when deciding which property is best, but I think at this part in the market cycle that it's better to be more conservative, especially with the trends of properties staying on market longer, the demand slowing down, and the overall feeling that a correction is going to occur shortly. There are also some other indicators as well. If you notice, appraisals are coming in tighter. There are actually a lot of homes that aren't appraising well, which means the banks are being more stringent on their guidelines too. Interest rates, obviously, as we all know, are rising. So it's okay to be fearful. But at the same time, at some point, if this is right for you, then you're going to have to make a decision which property is the best one to be your first property. So I don't think it's a bad thing right now to be cautious. If you are able to trust someone to provide that guidance and mentorship that you feel they can help you make a conservative investment, look over your numbers and help you along the way, I would highly advise trying to identify someone who can help you and provide that mentorship, because that'll also lower your risk as well, and it'll help you because it's always better to do things not alone. It's better to always have someone be an extra set of eyes and ears to help you through your first investment, and that's what I would advise. You can typically find those types of people at real estate meetups through BiggerPockets. Obviously, you want to do your own vetting of the person. If a friend of yours says that they're reliable, that's obviously a good endorsement. However, you still need to make sure that you vet that person as well, because it might end up being a win-win situation and a forever partnership, or it might be a situation that turns you off from real estate investing entirely, and that's obviously not what you want either. So that's what I would advise at this point. For Danny's question, do we use an architect for every property we buy? We do full gut renovations, so we do use an architect for, I would say, 95% of properties we buy. Very rarely do we do cosmetic renovations, and that might just be due to our area. The cosmetic flips tend to sell way above what we could possibly pay for them due to our renovation costs. There are a lot of people who are willing to just do the work themselves, and we are at the point now where we have subs do our work for us. So unfortunately, we can't offer prices on and be competitive on cosmetic rehabs. That's why we rarely get properties like that. And therefore, since we're doing full renovations, it requires us to have an architect because we need the drawings to get the permits. Okay, so Melanie, for permits, when you're doing any sort of structural change, changing to plumbing, HVAC, electric, changing floor plans, building additions, new roof, even townships require permits for demo. Every township and or city require an application for renovations on a home. Each township is different. When I say township, I mean township or city. It depends where you live, where you're getting your permits from, whether it's a city or a township, but it's one and the same. Each township and city are different. You have to identify what those requirements are. They're typically listed on your county or your township or city's website, and then you can identify what type of permit you need. Some townships have all of the permits listed under one application, whereas other townships have individual permits. So for example, you would need a roof permit, a demo permit, an HVAC permit. Regardless, if you're doing significant work, not just painting and retiling, let's say, then you would need a permit. So you get the application off of the website or in your city's office, and you complete the permit, which typically ask for your contractor's names, their license, their insurance, their phone number, their address, the company name. I mean, they're really asking for a significant amount of information that they can also have on file as well. And then what the city does is then they come out and do inspections periodically of your work, and those inspections also vary by city as well, so you'll have to identify that in your particular area, which inspections are required and by when. So they can stop in and check on the progress of the house at any time in addition to the inspections, but by and large they typically stop in when you have your scheduled inspection time. All right. Okay, so this is a great question. I know this isn't really a topic, but how do I find contractors? My business partner had his own business for over 45 years. He's a general contractor. He's worked on everything, and that's my father. And he has a lot of contacts. So one of the benefits to partnering with my father was the fact that he had a lot of contacts. Now, anyone who's listening to this saying, oh, well, lucky for you, you have a father who's a general contractor. I don't have a father who's a general contractor. How does that tip really help me? Well, the tip helps you because what I told you was my partner had his own business for over 45 years. A lot of people look for partners in this business, but they don't identify what they need. Your partner should fill in the gaps of what you need to make your business successful. If you're looking for subs, a potentially good partner is someone who is a general contractor and someone with a lot of experience who has a lot of contacts that can make your project run smoother because they've already identified good people to work with. If you don't want to partner with someone like that, or if you already have a partner and you still are looking for subs, there are a lot of ways you can find contractors. You can find them at Home Depot and Lowe's, which I know BiggerPockets always talks about. But what I like to do especially is when we find someone who is good, all you need is one good person to start. So let's say, for example, we found a great painter. The person is reliable, they do great work, they're efficient, they're everything you want in someone working on your project. Well, if I'm looking for a drywall guy, all I do is ask my good painter, because my painter is going to know that when I work after drywall guy A and he preps the walls perfectly, I can go much faster, and it's a much easier process for painting because I don't have to sand the walls over again, and they tape and mud the walls, so I'm not having nail pops come out and having to patch areas. they're going to know a good drywall guy. So what I like to do is try to identify someone, and then if I'm looking for anyone who either precedes that person or follows that person, you ask the person who you have already identified as a good contractor. So that's one tip that we have used to identify actually several great people, and it's turned out exceptionally well. And I hope that works for you too. Okay. So Danny has a good point about paying up front. Don't pay up front. We actually do a 30-30-30-10 payment plan. So that's 30% up front. After first day of work, all documents in, signed contract, W-9, insurance, etc. That is the 30%. The second 30% is at 50% completion, and these are tied in as well with inspections. If they're a trade that requires an inspection. 30% is at 90% completion, and then 10% is once everything is finalized. And the reason being is because you don't want, for example, your rough-in, your mechanical guys, so your HVAC, your electric, and your plumbing guys, you don't want their payment to be withheld because another tradesman is having a delay, and that's causing a delay to the overall inspection. So circling back to the inspections, a lot of times the inspections, when they're bundled together, the inspector doesn't want to come out and just inspect electric. They want to come out, inspect electric, plumbing, HVAC, and sometimes even rough-in framing or finish framing, etc. Whatever the case may be. But they sometimes bundle the inspection, so that's another reason. For buying your first property, you should definitely put it under your an LLC for your first deal. There are a bunch of other people who speak to this, and there's content on BiggerPockets that you can reference. So I won't go any further with that, but just to confirm, you should go with an LLC. Okay. So the live chats, I've been trying to keep it consistent on every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope that is working for everyone. I was trying to figure out the best time when I was doing it throughout the day, but it was inconsistent for me because I have different meetings during the day. So this was the most consistent time that I could come on and present content. So hopefully this works for you. If this does work for you and you would like different topics featured in the future, please feel free to comment, and I'd be happy to cover additional topics too. Rosie, for your question about leveraging partnerships work in so many different ways that it's impossible to cover it just in a response to your question. But what I would ask back of you is, how much is someone going to contribute to the partnership, and what value does that add? And then you equate that to the partnership and then make sure that it works for both parties. If someone is going to be actively involved all of the time and someone is only going to, help with design of the projects, and then they give a vision, and then other than that, they're removed from the entire project and they're only in the project a week out of the duration of the project, then I wouldn't consider doing a 50-50 partnership. I mean, you really need to understand what everyone's role and responsibility is going to be during that partnership and the life cycle of the project, and then tailor your partnership based off of that. The most important thing I think about a partnership is making sure that you have similar qualities, but you bring in different levels of expertise, And that way you complement each other without overlapping and creating points of tension where you have overlapping strengths and then having gaps in the process in other areas. You will really want to make sure that both partners provide enough experience and expertise in all the areas that are needed across the entire partnership. So you need someone who's good at accounting, you need someone who's good at design, you need someone who's good at project management, you need someone who's good at budgeting, you need someone who's good at scheduling, you need someone who's good at identifying contractors, writing contracts, knowing processes about the permit application that I've been talking a lot about tonight. You really need to make sure that you have all aspects covered, and that is for any type of partnership, not just for flipping, but for investing in any sort of business. So that's what I would say you should focus on. Okay, so with that, okay, sorry. Before closing, I'm just going to go real quickly over to Facebook. I'm sorry, I haven't been answering the questions on Facebook, so let me try to get to the questions here. Okay. I don't know if anyone else has been having this problem with Facebook, and I apologize for this, but it doesn't seem that all the comments are displaying. So I sometimes have difficulties with it because it looks like no one has any questions, and then all of a sudden they all pop up for me. So I'm sorry about that. I have had, to Eric Fraser's question on short sales, I have had experience with short sales. They take a long time to close, but they can be hugely profitable if you're willing to wait out the lag time for a bank to get it all together to finalize. It's a very difficult process. But what I would say with short sales to me is kind of like a bonus. So when we get a property under contract that's a short sale, we still keep going out and identifying other properties. Our mindset is that property will eventually close, but we're not counting on that property at any time. Our last short sale property, we were under contract in May and didn't close until the following February, to give you a perspective of how long we waited for that property to close. And in that same time, I can't even tell you how many other properties we bought. We just kept buying properties if we could handle those properties, because we knew that eventually that property would close, but that we would not rely on that property to close. So besides our deposit, that was really the only thing that was held up while we waited for the short sale property to close. So I'm not sure I understand your question, Darcy, about the general contractors. It's their responsibility to put licenses and stuff together, right, for the permit. So there are people who that's how they handle permit process. I hope I'm understanding your question correctly, which I think what you're trying to say is, isn't it the responsibility of the general contractor to complete the paperwork and submit it to the township? That is true. However, we find it's more helpful to put all the documentation together for the contractor and then have them sign their name. So we complete the application for them. We fill out their license information. We already have their license on file, so we just copy it. We copy their insurance. And they write out the scope of what they're doing. We have it signed. So we bring it to them to another job site that they're at, and we just have them sign. And we actually put everything together to make sure nothing's missed. And we turn in the permit collectively, so all the pieces are together. And we know 100% that we submitted the permit on X date, and therefore we should have an approval or some sort of feedback back in 15 working days. That's state of Pennsylvania's regulations. So that way we can control the time that it takes for that permit to be approved. Brian, you have a tenant wanting to leave before Christmas, and you want to know what's the best way to get someone in around the holidays. I would start trying to advertise now and maybe give some sort of incentive to a person, considering a rent concession maybe for the first month, to encourage someone to rent the property, because it is definitely more difficult to get someone in during the holiday period. But advertising in advance and also to giving a rent concession may encourage someone to lease your unit in advance. So I know we're not really talking about how to get tenants in, but just to answer that question. Okay, so I think that's all the questions on Facebook. And with that, I want to thank everyone again for tuning in. I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. I really enjoy these talks with everyone and sharing the content, and hopefully these 8 tips will help you shorten your timeline, because time is money on any sort of project. So remember, the more you can do in advance and the more prepared you are, it seems to me that the project runs a lot smoother. So I hope these tips will help you make your projects run a lot smoother, and you'll be able to get to the next level even faster. With that, happy Thanksgiving and have a great night.